Greed is not good. If Wall Street does not end its greed, we will end it for them.
Hey, capitalism has been perhaps the most misconstrued and misused term that I've ever come across. For an average person, capitalism is evocative of external images of colonialism, suffering, and slavery, or the sight of a billionaire whose convoy passes through the streets, whose sidewalks have been unfortunate precedents to many. Those willing to ponder about capitalism often come across those who carry the same misconceptions and misinformations. The misinformation about capitalism proliferates among people and only worsens when people use emotionally appealing arguments that often treat reason as a secondary. And as a consequence, today here we are in a world where people take modern refuge in glorifying socialism. These socialist sympathizers who practice Marxism in every policy that they propose forget that the very Russia that they thoroughly detest has socialism and Marxism in its roots. George Santayana's aphorism that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. If you're like me, then to you, the absolute of capitalism would be a utopia where you have the freedom as an individual to mind your own business, both figuratively and literally, without the fear of being unfairly squashed by a government gavel. But this perception was most likely not something that you always had, thanks to liberal indoctrination. But to those who have been successfully liberally indoctrinated, the right's desire for capitalism to them would mean an authoritarian state where the poor are exploited for the benefit of the rich, where they are destined to remain poor for the rest of their lives. The disconnect is this. When the left hears capitalism, what they really think about is corporatism. So they think of an authoritarian state run by the corporations that want to exploit ordinary man for their profits. So the left's prescribed solution to this is to have an authoritarian state run by the ordinary man in the form of a collective that wants to exploit corporations for their profits, which really is retributive justice, isn't it? A British politician, Mike Buchanan, argued that if we were going in for retributive justice, then perhaps a black American should be given a white slave each. So we ought not to be emotional, but rather rational about it, because the political system affects all our lives. The rational way to go about this is to have a political system where the businesses have their freedoms and so does the ordinary man. And they deal with each other with mutual consent and mutual respect. Wherever there is coercion against one another, the government jumps in to resolve the dispute through law and order, which is precisely what capitalism is all about. It's freedom. Free markets give everybody the freedom and opportunity to be rich or poor. So with these differences in perception of capitalism, when these two, a leftist and a right-winger, debate each other, it's not a discussion, it's a confrontation. This phobia of capitalism understandably comes with history, a history filled with enormous suffering caused by colonialism, slavery, where usually the businessmen were addressed as capitalist, has indeed left an indelible mark in people's minds. While the leftist intelligentsia makes vitriolic attacks on capitalism for its dark history, they conveniently push under the rug the evils of socialism, claiming that it was actually this divine concept that went terribly wrong every single time. This adulterated history caused the phobia of capitalism, which is not unique to the West, by the way. India, after independence from the British Empire, was shattered in all forms, having been the richest country in the world at that time to one of the poorest. It adopted the Soviet Union's economic model and an isolationist foreign policy in the hopes of confronting this plight. The Indian leaders were unwilling to allow privatization and open up to the rest of the world. They were infused with concerns and skepticism of allowing foreign companies to do business in India. Because the last time when India paved the way for a foreign company to do business on its land, it ended up being colonized for the next 200 years. This went on until the highly propagandized paradise of Soviet Union finally collapsed in the 90s. India was also heading towards an economic fiasco. This socialist approach had to be changed and capitalism had to be embraced. The game-changing economic liberalization took place. The private companies were allowed to be established. The market started opening up to foreign trade. India started getting increasingly capitalist. And fast forward 26 years with consistently high rates of GDP and is the 7th largest economy. It's at a point where one wouldn't have anticipated a couple of decades ago. This only goes to show, as Shashi Tharoor puts it, that sometimes history can teach you wrong lessons. If you've been following writers on Facebook, or perhaps the folks at Hollywood who give cosmic importance to politics over their movies, then you must have witnessed a series of articles regarding Trump's administration's repeal of regulations. There has been some new repeal, or at least a proposal, almost every day. And this went on for quite some time. For every article that said that there has been a repeal of a certain regulation, it was showered with angry reactions. For instance, if it were a certain social program, the reaction was that Trump did it because he hated the poor or women. If it were the repeal of a certain environmental regulation, the reaction was that Trump did it because he hated the environment. Now, I know we all care for the environment, but the principle remains the same. The comments were filled with grief and contempt for allowing corporations more room for their profit-making endeavors. This frustration is a consequence of a conclusion derived based on the conflict of left's adopted morality from altruism, where you're virtuous when you do things for people around you and hold no expectations in return, and then apply it to economics, where the businesses work exclusively on self-interest and profit. This mindset that removing a regulation would give them more room for self-interest and hence more evil is the source of all arguments that justify the use of lawmaking as a weapon for combating the so-called evil. This stems from the notion, which is at the core of every leftist, the idea that human beings are inherently evil in nature, and therefore they must be controlled and corrected by the rest of the society. So according to this philosophy, your sacrifice for others makes you a good person, but working for your benefit and self-interest makes you a bad person, which is incompatible with businesses. This is an artificial construct that goes against the natural survival instincts of species, and therefore the conclusion is to make human beings good by the use of brute force. A left's version of original sin. They denounce religion, even ridicule it, but then practice the same principles. However, by replacing God with government, although today some would argue that to the left, the government is not just God, but a mom, a dad, and everything. And that's why the left would cheer for Bill Gates when he invents Windows and makes all our lives better, but would detest him when they see him make huge money out of it. He's good as long as he keeps talking about donating and helping the needy, but would turn out to be an evil person as soon as he thinks well for himself. The society's imposition on you to have you exhibit remorse for the crime of being successful. Their apprehension for freedom is what drives them. And that's why the left advocates for more and more regulations and bigger government. This is a difference between the leftists and the right libertarians. The libertarian right does not believe that human beings are inherently evil in nature. The libertarian right is against the imposition of their morality on others. Another reason, apart from history and philosophy, would be human nature, which is, surprise, envy, the jealousy of your neighbor. As Ayn Rand puts it, quote, "Today you're supposed to apologize to every naked savage anywhere on the globe because you're more prosperous. Because you earned the money, you have to feel guilty and apologize for it while he hasn't and doesn't intend to learn from you. He just wants your money." Unquote. The jealousy of your neighbor and his desire that a greater part of your fortune has to be taken away from you because he and the rest have decided that you have more than what you need, and that they know better than you on how that money ought to be spent, and also that it is justified as long as they're doing it for a noble cause. This is the most vindictive, collectivist, and uncivilized behaviors of all. They pass a law that seems so kind and compassionate, and the society applauds the government for passing such a law, which potentially wins it a good amount of votes. You're fine as long as you comply, but the moment you don't, the next thing you see is guns and handcuffs. There's no other way out because every law is indeed a government enforcement. Government is required to enforce them. They're carried out at gunpoint. There is no room for your opinion. And what is the outcome? If you don't comply, you're the most evilest person. If you do comply, however, you're fine, many do it, nothing special. But you have to sacrifice and suffer enough in order to satisfy the rest to be applauded as a good person. What's most striking is that this is not attacking man for his mistakes, not for his crimes, but for his success and for his fortunes. It's not caring for the needy and the poor. It's a hatred of good for being the good. The problem is that the left considers one's prosperity as evil, success as evil, and the richer and successful you are, the more evil you are to the left. And you must be dragged down since many others are living far less well off than you are. But if you do remain poor, however, by the way, then they love you and they care for you and will fight for you on your behalf to tax the rich and distribute that money to you. If this is not parasitic, I don't know what it is. The poor and the needy is not a reason, but an excuse to moralize and justify their atrocities against the successful. We need to protect our freedoms from the leftist depredations. I hold adulterated history, self-destructive philosophy, and the tribalistic instincts of human beings as the primary reason why the left hates capitalism. This leaves out many other reasons such as emotionally appealing left versus logical right, the top 1% fallacy, the deceptive term crony capitalism, and lots of many. But these are the top 3 reasons why left hates capitalism, aka freedom. If you like my video, do subscribe to my channel, and I hope you have a great day.